They never expected to wake up with thoughts of you filling their mind so completely. This is the first important thing you need to understand. Most people are too afraid to face what they have buried deep inside themselves after spending years using all their strength and determination to keep it hidden. The intensity had already taken hold of them because acting indifferent seemed to work quietly in a subtle way that was difficult to notice at first. But this situation was never truly silent. It became a real battle they had been losing, even while their eyes remained closed and the world around them looked perfectly calm on the surface. You sensed it yourself, didn't you? There was that slight change and that hidden current of energy, as though something important was slowly unfolding beneath their calm and controlled exterior. It was never really about distance or uncertainty. It was something much deeper and far more serious. It involved a genuine awareness of what was happening inside them without hesitation or doubt. People rarely welcome their emotions when those feelings first begin to appear. Instead, they resist them, question them, and examine them from every possible angle. They hide those emotions beneath endless excuses, their pride, and the strong emotional walls they have carefully built over many years. What they feel for you doesn't fit the image of themselves they have worked so hard to maintain every single day. This conflict is where everything begins to become difficult and overwhelming for them. The more a feeling challenges their sense of control and pride, the harder they fight to push it down. This process is what psychologists like Freud described as repression, the mind's natural tendency to push away desires or emotions that feel uncomfortable or unacceptable. But repression is not the same as forgetting. It creates pressure, and that pressure continues building over time. Eventually, it finds a way to rise to the surface, no matter how much effort is used to keep it buried. Most people do not understand this truth until much later than they should. What they refused to acknowledge yesterday slowly becomes the force shaping their thoughts and behavior today, often without them even realizing it. That is exactly why this morning felt different from every other ordinary morning they had experienced before. It was not because something completely new appeared. It happened because something finally gave way inside them, and you were not there to witness that deeply personal collapse of denial. This hidden collapse was never a dramatic confession or a direct message. Instead, it was the moment when every strategy they had used to escape their feelings stopped working completely. During that heavy silence, their usual distractions disappeared, and you returned not simply as a memory, but as an unavoidable realization. Attraction can often be dismissed, curiosity can be ignored, but when something carries genuine emotional meaning, the mind begins to crack under the weight of avoidance. They were forced to face a question they had been avoiding for a very long time. Why do you affect them so deeply? They tried to answer that question using logic alone. They convinced themselves the feeling was temporary, unimportant, and certain to fade with time. They used every explanation they could find. Coincidence, chemistry, timing, circumstance, anything except the truth they feared the most. The reality is simple. People do not spend endless energy trying to explain away something that means nothing. They do not fight against emotions that have no value, nor do they work tirelessly to bury feelings that lack real depth. Every effort they made to remove you from their thoughts only made your presence stronger and more defined. Every distraction eventually failed at the exact moment they needed it most. This is not evidence of weakness. It is evidence of something real quietly taking shape beneath the surface. They never wanted something they could not completely control. They wanted full authority over their emotions, reactions, and decisions. Then you entered their life and disrupted that carefully maintained balance. You became the one variable they could not solve, the one emotion they could not predict, the one presence they could not erase. No matter how determined they were, that loss of certainty frightened them more than anything else. It was never only about you. It was about what you awakened inside them. You did not simply create a small disturbance in their life. You awakened something that had been sleeping for years, and people rarely fear emotions themselves. They fear losing control over who they believe they are. This explains why they suddenly withdrew and why their behavior became inconsistent. Their energy felt scattered, not because they cared too little, but because they cared far more than they knew how to handle comfortably. Feeling something this deeply requires a decision, and they were not ready to make that decision. Avoidance is not proof that desire is absent. Very often, it proves the opposite. It shows that the desire has become powerful enough to create inner conflict. Their internal struggle slowly began taking control as the conscious mind ordered them to remain safe behind walls of logic while the subconscious continued bringing you back. It recreated your presence during quiet moments exactly when their distractions lost their power. They slowly realized that you were not fading from their mind as they had hoped. Instead, your image became clearer, sharper, and increasingly difficult to ignore. Denial requires distance to survive. Yet your influence continued growing stronger even without physical closeness. Once a feeling moves beyond uncertainty and settles into subconscious certainty, it no longer asks for permission, it demands attention. That exact turning point arrived for them this morning in a quiet yet powerful way. Without comfort, without warning, without escape. It arrived like a silent wave that left them exposed to a truth they could no longer avoid. Their walls did not collapse because someone attacked them from the outside. They collapsed beneath the weight of everything they had been hiding inside. And somehow, that affected them more deeply than any spoken confession ever could. Because the truth was never spoken aloud. It was simply understood. And once something meaningful is understood at that level, it becomes extremely difficult to reverse. A person can mislead others. A person can even deceive themselves for a while. But once the mind fully accepts a truth, it rarely lets go without resistance. They know now, not partially, not vaguely, not with uncertainty. They know. Yet acceptance does not immediately bring peace. In many cases, it creates even greater turmoil because now they must face everything they had previously avoided. They must consider what these feelings truly mean, what changes may now be necessary, how their future could be affected, and perhaps, most importantly, what they stand to lose if they continue pretending nothing is there. Feelings of this magnitude do not remain still. They evolve. They grow stronger. They continue moving forward. Right now, they stand at the edge of all that accumulated pressure, doing everything they can to maintain a sense of control while the foundation beneath them continues to shift. Part of them still wants to retreat into familiar patterns. Part of them still wants to convince themselves that ignoring the situation will somehow make it disappear. But another part knows better. Another part has already seen the truth clearly. That is why the struggle feels so exhausting. They are no longer fighting against you. They are fighting against what they now understand. The mind wants certainty. The heart wants honesty. And when those two forces pull in opposite directions, people often become confused by their own behavior. One day, they seem distant. The next day, they appear emotionally present. One moment, they convince themselves they are finally over it. The next moment, they find themselves thinking about you before the day has even begun. That inconsistency is not always manipulation. Sometimes it is simply the visible evidence of an invisible conflict, a conflict between what they feel and what they believe they should feel, between what they desire and what they think is safest, between surrender and resistance. Every morning becomes more difficult because the quiet hours leave fewer places to hide. When the world becomes silent, distractions lose their influence. Responsibilities fade into the background. The noise disappears, and what remains is the truth waiting beneath everything else. That truth keeps finding its way back to you, no matter how many explanations they create, no matter how many times they try to redirect their attention, no matter how firmly they insist they have moved on. The feeling keeps returning, not because they won't turn it to as they want it to, but because it has never truly left. What surprises them most is not the intensity of the feeling itself. It is its persistence. They expected time to weaken it. They expected distance to dissolve it. They expected logic to overcome it, yet none of those things worked the way they expected. Instead, the feeling adapted. It survived every attempt to remove it. It remained present through every distraction and every moment of denial, slowly, quietly, and steadily, until one day they could no longer pretend they were unaffected. That realization changes everything, not because it instantly solves the situation, but because denial can no longer do its job. Once the illusion breaks, it becomes impossible to see things exactly the way they once did. The questions become louder. The emotions become clearer. The consequences of avoidance become much harder to ignore. Suddenly, the future begins demanding answers that were never necessary before. They find themselves wondering what happens next, what they should do, whether they should continue resisting, whether they should finally admit what they truly feel, and whether remaining silent now costs more than speaking honestly. Those questions stay with them long after the morning has passed, because the issue is no longer whether the feeling exists. That question has already been answered. The issue now is what they are going to do with that knowledge, and that is where the deepest uncertainty begins. Not in discovering the truth, but in deciding how to live with it. At this moment, they remain caught between the comfort of familiar defenses and the undeniable reality of what their heart continues revealing. The pressure keeps increasing. Their awareness continues expanding. And beneath every attempt to regain control is one simple realization they can no longer escape. Some feelings become too important to ignore. Some connections become too meaningful to dismiss. And some truths, once fully recognized, continue echoing through every quiet morning long after denial has finally fallen apart. This experience was never only about you as a person in their life. It was also about the deeper parts of themselves that you helped awaken and bring into conscious awareness. That process of inner awakening is still unfolding, and it has not yet reached its final stage. They believed that accepting their feelings would make everything calmer and easier to manage over time. They were mistaken. Admitting the truth this morning did not quiet the storm inside them. It simply gave that storm a clear name and a recognizable identity. Once something meaningful has a name, it becomes much harder to avoid or escape. Awareness alone does not reduce the intensity of emotions. In many situations, it sharpens them. It transforms uncertain feelings into something solid, undeniable, and impossible to dismiss. The new reality began pressing against them almost immediately. They can no longer convince themselves that nothing is happening or that these emotions will simply disappear on their own. Every thought now carries greater meaning. Every memory feels more significant. Every quiet moment seems filled with emotional tension. When the mind loses its ability to deny something real, it naturally begins moving in two opposite directions. One side moves toward you, the other desperately tries to pull away. Neither side is willing to surrender easily. This is not ordinary confusion. It is a genuine inner conflict between powerful desire and powerful self-protection happening at the same time. Both forces continue growing stronger because what they feel for you has moved beyond simple attraction. It is gradually becoming emotional attachment. And attachment can feel threatening to someone who fears losing control over their choices, routines, and carefully protected independence. Most people never notice this deeper process taking place inside themselves. The stronger the emotional current becomes, the stronger their psychological defenses rise in response. That is why, after recognizing their true feelings, they did not immediately move forward with confidence. Instead, they paused. They thought too much. They examined every possibility from every angle. They began over-analyzing things that once felt completely natural, because those things suddenly carried greater meaning and greater risk. Anything that truly matters begins to feel dangerous. Dangerous to their freedom. Dangerous to their identity. Dangerous to the image of themselves they have spent years building and protecting. People do not fear what they do not value. That simple truth creates a contradiction they can no longer ignore. The very feeling drawing them closer is also encouraging them to step back. The same emotion creating hope is also creating fear. And that contradiction produces constant tension beneath the surface. The ongoing tension slowly drains their energy. It follows them into every part of daily life. It appears during ordinary moments that once felt completely normal because now almost everything carries a subtle reminder of you. A familiar tone of voice, a brief pause during a conversation, a certain facial expression, a particular silence. Any one of these can suddenly bring thoughts of you back into focus without warning. The subconscious mind holds on much more tightly than the conscious mind realizes because it does not operate according to schedules, plans, or logic. You have crossed an important threshold inside their inner world. You are no longer something optional. You are no longer a passing thought they can easily set aside. Now they must confront the question they have avoided for so long. Why you? Why does your presence affect them in such a unique and powerful way? Why does your influence feel different from everyone else's? The more they search for logical explanations, the less logical it all seems. This connection was never built on convenience. It was never based only on circumstances. It cannot be reduced to one simple story or a single explanation. It comes from something much deeper, something rooted in recognition, something that feels both unchosen and impossible to avoid. And if this connection is real, then it asks something important from them. It asks for action. It asks for honesty. It asks for emotional openness. It asks for vulnerability. Those are the very things they have spent years avoiding. Because of that, they try to slow the process. They create distance. They delay important decisions. They search for reasons to wait. They hope that time might eventually weaken what they feel. Yet, distance rarely weakens a genuine emotional bond. In many cases, it makes that bond even stronger. Distance removes distractions. It strips away unnecessary noise. It leaves only the truth. And when distractions disappear, that truth often becomes louder instead of quieter. That is exactly what is happening now. The truth is becoming increasingly difficult for them to ignore. They feel it when their thoughts unexpectedly return to you. They feel it in sudden emotional waves that appear during the day. They feel it in the restless feeling that refuses to settle, no matter how much effort they put into controlling it. Suppression continues failing again and again. The tension is becoming even more real because they are now fully aware of their feelings while still actively resisting them. They recognize the truth, yet they continue questioning it. They acknowledge its power, yet they hesitate to carry its full weight. This creates an ongoing psychological pressure that never completely disappears. Instead, it continues building. It tightens little by little until something eventually has to give. What makes this struggle even more difficult is that they are not only battling the feeling itself, they are also confronting what that feeling reveals about who they really are. Their emotions expose hidden desires, hidden fears, hidden needs. What they feel for you reveals a longing to connect deeply with another person, a desire to be genuinely understood, and a wish to be fully seen without hiding behind carefully built masks. At the same time, it reveals a fear of allowing another person to affect them so profoundly. Being affected this deeply requires vulnerability. Vulnerability requires trust, and trust requires giving up at least some control. That is the part that makes them uncomfortable. That is why they continue moving back and forth. One moment they lean closer emotionally, and the next moment they retreat mentally. One moment they imagine hopeful possibilities, and the next moment they convince themselves the situation is too complicated or too risky. This pattern is not random. It acts as a form of emotional protection. It allows them to experience these feelings gradually instead of surrendering to them all at once. But there is a limit to how long that strategy can work. You cannot experience something this meaningful halfway forever. You can postpone it. You can delay it. You can distract yourself from it. But eventually, it demands to be faced. And every delay comes with a cost. Suppressed emotions do not disappear without leaving traces behind. They transform. They become tension. They become restlessness. They become mental noise that follows a person throughout the day. Recently, that noise has grown stronger for them, more persistent and much harder to ignore. It is beginning to affect more than just their emotions. It is influencing their thinking patterns, their daily habits, their behavior, and even their physical state. Sometimes it appears as reduced concentration. Sometimes it appears as shifting moods. Sometimes it shows itself through unusually strong reactions to situations that have nothing to do with the real issue. What is happening beneath the surface is actually simple. An unresolved truth is rising upward. And that truth is asking for something they are not completely prepared to offer. Not yet. Not without hesitation. Not without fear. Yet the pressure continues building anyway. Every attempt to push it away only delays the inevitable confrontation. Every effort to suppress it creates even more internal resistance. Every attempt to avoid it strengthens the tension underneath. That is why they are closer to their personal breaking point than they realize. Not because they are weak, not because they are losing control completely, but because maintaining resistance requires enormous energy. And that energy is running lower with every passing day. Something important is beginning to crack inside them. The structure they built to contain these emotions is no longer as strong as it once was. The walls are still standing, but they can feel the strain. They sense the pressure. They hear the quiet warning signs beneath the surface. Part of them knows they cannot continue carrying this contradiction forever. Part of them understands that sooner or later, a choice will have to be made. A choice between continued resistance and honest acceptance. A choice between fear and openness. A choice between protecting old defenses and embracing a truth that has already become impossible to ignore. That realization is what makes this period so intense, because deep down, they know the situation is changing. The emotions are becoming stronger. Their awareness is becoming clearer, and the space available for denial is becoming smaller with every passing day. Something significant is shifting inside them right now. Not dramatically, not loudly, but steadily. And that quiet shift may be more powerful than any outward action, because it is happening at the deepest level of their thoughts, emotions, and understanding. What they once resisted is becoming harder to reject. What they once questioned is becoming harder to doubt. And what they once tried to suppress is gradually demanding its rightful place in the light. The real transformation is not happening on the outside, where they continue maintaining a calm appearance through habit and careful effort each day. It is happening underneath the surface, where the mind slowly stops pretending and where truth exists without needing permission, approval, or validation from anyone. Repression always comes with a hidden price, and that price is now becoming due. The longer someone pushes down something authentic, the more forcefully it tends to return later. What once seemed manageable now feels intrusive. What once felt distant now feels immediate. What could once be questioned now feels undeniably real within their heart. When the subconscious can no longer remain contained, it does not negotiate gently. It breaks through suddenly, directly, and often in ways they never expected. It appears through unexpected reactions. It shows up as irritability. It reveals itself when small problems create unusually strong frustration without any obvious reason. Their ability to focus disappears the moment thoughts of you unexpectedly enter their mind. You are no longer simply another person existing somewhere in their outer world. You have become part of their private inner reality, and that difference changes everything. External situations can be avoided, People can create distance, they can distract themselves, they can replace one activity with another. But internal realities follow a person everywhere. They follow them into silence, into solitude, into sleep, and into the moments they believed belonged only to themselves. Their resistance is beginning to weaken because the central question has changed. The question is no longer whether they feel something genuine. That answer is already clear. The new question is what they are going to do about it. And that question frightens them more than the feelings themselves. Because taking action means exposure. It means vulnerability. It means allowing another person to see the parts of them they normally keep carefully protected. Most people spend years trying to avoid exactly this kind of situation. You cannot fully control something that has already transformed you from within, and in ways they may never openly admit, you have changed them, not temporarily, not superficially, but deeply.